All right, so in our last video, we saw that the director was immensely unpopular and eventually be overthrown in a coup d'etat by this man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, when Napoleon was born, no one, let alone himself, ever thought he'd be the emperor of France and eventually the conqueror of Europe, because he was not even French technically. He was Corsican. Corsica is an island off the coast of Italy. In fact, not long before Napoleon was born, Corsica was in a rebellion trying to gain its independence from France. In fact, Napoleon will never even learn how to speak French until age 9, and he'll always do so with an odd sounding accent because of it. And in fact, if you asked a young Napoleon, a teenage Napoleon, what do you want to do with your life, he would not say Emperor of France. He would say Liberator of Corsica. And plans just kind of changed a bit. Now, his family technically was related to an old Italian noble family, yet they were not wealthy at all. Money will always be a problem for the Bonapartes as Napoleon grows up. But since technically his father was nobility, that allows him to get a scholarship to go to school in France, right? At age 9, he is shipped off from Corsica to France to begin his formal education. And eventually he will end up in a military school. Now, he was not an immensely popular classmate because of his accent, because he was relatively poor compared to the rest of his classmates. He was rather arrogant. He had a short fuse. He held grudges. It's a Corsican thing. But he did excel at math and history. He actually graduated from school a year early and entered into the French military around age 16. And then nothing really happens a couple of years in his military career. Then the French Revolution happens, and the chaos of the French Revolution will allow a man like Napoleon to rise through the ranks. And he first achieved fame at Toulon. If you remember, the city of Toulon became anti-revolutionary and actually opened up its harbor to the British fleet. And so the revolutionary government was trying to take it back. And Napoleon gets stationed at Toulon as an artillery officer, and he draws up a plan on how to recapture it. And his commanding officer agrees with the plan. They put it into place, and it actually works due to the plan of Napoleon, right? The British are driven from Toulon, and he becomes rather famous and comes to the attention of Robespierre and Robespierre's brother. Unfortunately, fortunes in the revolution changed very quickly, and when the Reign of Terror was over and Robespierre and Robespierre's brother was executed, anyone associated with Robespierre was seen as potentially guilty. Napoleon was actually arrested and thrown in jail for a little while, and once released, he was basically demoted and ended up in a desk job in Paris working in the maps department, which he hated. Right? But then he got lucky. Remember, the directory was immensely unpopular, and one time members of the Paris Commune, the Sans Culottes, rose in another violent rebellion against the directory, and Napoleon saved them with what's been called the whiff of grape shot. Napoleon ordered the building of the directory surrounded by cannons, and as an angry mob charged, he ordered the cannons to fire grape shot. Grape shot is a kind of ammunition. Instead of one big cannonball, it shoots out a bunch of smaller ones and can do a lot of damage. Then the angry mob disperses and runs away, and he saves the directory. And he becomes a hero once again. And not long after that, he meets a woman named Josephine, who was a widow and already had children, and he falls madly in love with Josephine. Josephine does not fall madly in love with him, but does see in him an opportunity to marry someone whose star is rising. And eventually they marry, and 2 days later, Napoleon, as a reward for saving the directory, is given his first command. He is put in charge of the French army fighting in the Italian states, where they are fighting the Austrians and the Piedmontese and some of the other Italian states. And he inherits a mess. Many of his soldiers had not been paid in months. Oftentimes they were poorly supplied. Their morale was low. The commanding officers beneath him are not happy that a 26-year-old Corsican is going to be their commanding officer. So he had to win them all over. He wins over the officers just by, well, intimidation and force of will, and he wins the soldiers over by promising them riches and wealth, and also leading by example. There's a famous battle in the Italian campaign where Napoleon orders the French army to take this bridge. And the French army charges the bridge, and the French army is repelled or pushed back. He orders them to charge again, and again they are repelled and pushed back. And eventually, Napoleon leads the charge himself. He grabs the tricolor, gets in the front line, and leads the charge across the bridge, where he is almost shot. The bullet actually goes through his coat, makes a hole in his coat, and misses him. But after this, right, his soldiers are pretty much going to do anything for him, and some of these soldiers will be with him up until his last. Right? And he begins to turn the tides of victory in Italy, and begins to win victory after victory after victory until he eventually defeats the Austrians and the Piedmontese and the other Italian states, becoming a huge national hero. So popular that the Directory actually begins to worry that he's going to overthrow them in a coup, so they had to scheme to doom his career and suggest that he lead the invasion of Britain, who France was at war with. Now, Napoleon is no fool. He knew at that point that campaign was doomed to fail, kind of guessed what the Directory is doing, and he said, how about this instead? How about we invade and take over Egypt? If we can take over Egypt and push the British out of Egypt, we can then use Egypt as a base to interfere with British trade in Southeast Asia. And the Directory like, that's genius, that sounds great, plus that makes you go far away, let's do it. So off he goes on his Egyptian campaign, which at first went very well for him. He won the Battle of the Pyramids, right? It sounds all heroic, and became a hero once again. But eventually the fortunes change. Plague begins to work its way through the army. The British begin to defeat him. His fleet is destroyed while in port at Alexandria. He gets word that Josephine back in France is having an affair with a French officer. And then he gets wind that the Directory is immensely unpopular, and he sees that as his chance. Now, the Egyptian campaign, besides being important in his career because it helps make him famous, even though it was a bit of a disaster, but guess who wrote the military reports that got sent back to the Directory? It was Napoleon. So from reading the reports, everything was going great, and that's what the French newspapers reported. Anyway, but another reason why the Egyptian campaign is so important is because Napoleon, he's a child of the Enlightenment, right? He admires reason and logic and learning. Remember, he excelled at history in school. He loved history. So when he invaded Egypt, he didn't just bring soldiers with him. He brought scholars with him. He brought historians with him. He brought artists with him. He brought naturalists with him. He brought scientists with him. And while in Egypt, some of the French soldiers accidentally discovered the Rosetta Stone, which you might have learned about in middle school. Remember, the Rosetta Stone was this stone that had the same message written three different ways: in hieroglyphs, a writing called Coptic, and then in Greek. And historians could read ancient Greek, but they could not read hieroglyphs. But now, right, it's the same message written in three different ways. They could read the Greek and compare that to the hieroglyphs, and eventually they kind of cracked the code, so to speak. So because of the French Revolution, Napoleon gets sent to Egypt, and while in Egypt, the Rosetta Stone is discovered, which allows us to decipher hieroglyphs. Just another example of Napoleon having a huge consequence.